there's an effort afoot to move all those individual animals to sanctuary, and I think that's where Sarah's going to pick up.
Thank you so much, Anna. Okay, thank you so much for being here tonight, and thanks to Anna for that good introduction. I think it's a perfect segue for me to talk about sort of the practical implications of some of this stuff changing, and to talk more in detail about my work with chimps. And I kind of get to do the happy, fun stuff, which is all the lawyers do their hard work, and then I get to retire the chimps. So it's a good spot for me to be in. Just make sure I don't trip in front of all of you. So I like when I'm talking about this issue, especially lately, to just sort of pause and reflect on the fact that a lot of us who work in the field of animal protection and really feel that connection with animals, and primates in particular for me, but animals in general, we don't get a lot of like huge victories, right? But this is, especially with chimps, and at this time, it's a really exciting time to care for chimps, and I think non-human primates in general, as tides are turning a little bit. And so this context for me is 20 years ago when I met Washoe, who was the first chimp, or one of the first chimps to speak sign language. I was in this program where we did some advocacy and public outreach about chimps in captivity and in the wild, and I did lectures to the public when they would come to meet the chimps at my program in Washington. And I remember the script still about how there were 1,200 chimps in research. That was the line and the fact then. And there were all these other uses of chimps. So there were chimps in the pet trade, there were chimps in the entertainment trade, and there were chimps in zoos, and some in sanctuaries, although 20 years ago there really weren't that many yet in sanctuaries. And I remember telling these people who were coming to meet the chimps, we're never going to be able to do anything about those chimps in research. It's necessary, it's required. It's this structure that's ingrained in our culture. So we work on the issues of chimps as pets and in entertainment, and those sort of more the easier to attack, sort of the low-hanging fruit. We thought at the time that it was easier to say we got to get chimps out of backyards or movie sets. And we, at that time, I never thought that in my career I would be standing up here talking about how, we pretty much did that too with chimps in research. So I like to just have everyone, keep in mind in all of this work that we do protecting animals, that there are these moments where we really have to sort of say, like, we did it, and what can we do next? And I sort of also like to say that we're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants in all this work. So there's all this work that's been done to protect chimps in particular, and now the conversation in the primate sanctuary community is how can we take all these exciting advances that we've made for chimps and apply it to the other monkeys, other primates who are in research still, and those numbers are staggering. And I hope that somewhere out there's someone saying we'll never address the monkeys in labs, but 20 years from now maybe someone will be standing up there like me saying that we took care of that too. So it's nice to just have that moment of success. So as Anna talked about, there's all this sort of regulatory schemes. There's two main populations of chimps who are used in research. As I said, the pet trade is almost done at this point. The entertainment trade is also almost done. So a lot of those of us who work on chimps, and I spent a lot of time working on the entertainment issue earlier in my career, a lot of us have switched over to the research side. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight, or what I'm going to talk about tonight. So there's the federally owned chimps who are owned by the government in some way, and then there's the privately owned chimps. And as Anna said also, the Chimp Act is designed to address the federally owned chimps. So that act was designed to sort of provide the retirement plan for captive federally owned chimps who are being used in research. As she alluded to, they aren't coming out of research and into sanctuary as fast as we would like. So in this year at Chimp Haven, which is our colleague sanctuary, it's in Louisiana, that's the one that has the federal contract to retire all of the federally owned chimps. They've all been designated for retirement at this point, and there's about 300 of them or so. Only 13 have moved from lab to sanctuary this year. So there's a lot of work to be done there. The privately owned sort of framework is different because there's no regulatory requirement that they be retired. It's sort of, they're warehousing these chimps now that all of these changes have happened and research really isn't or can't be done on them anymore. So what I will focus on tonight primarily is the private population, because that's what I've been working on for the past couple years. But there is this framework for the federal chimps, and there's this kind of question mark right now, and news recently has sort of indicated that there's going to be some more movement from labs to the federal sanctuary at Chimp Haven, but it's still kind of a question mark. So what I'll focus on more is the private chimps and what we've done to address them, since there is, even though it's not functioning well, that framework for the federal chimps. So in the last couple years, again, you have that base already. There's been this sort of perfect storm. So all of these changes with the ESA and with the NIH really investigating and making that determination that chimps are not really not needed in research anymore. Along with that was some really wise public outreach. And so there is this sort of energy now where there have been a lot of really major mainstream media stories about chimps in research. It's been a time for the past couple of years where the public, the sort of decision makers, policy-wise, scientists are all kind of aligned around this idea that we don't need chimps in research. So it is essentially over. But what do we do with them, and how do we get them to sanctuary is still a big question. So a little more history before I talk about the fun stuff that we do in Georgia. Sort of historically, how have chimps gotten to sanctuaries? I thought it might be nice to just look at that for a second. So early on, as I said, 20 years ago, there really weren't too many chimps in sanctuaries. The Laboratory for Experimental Medicine and Surgery in Primates, LEMSIP, here in New York, shut down. And thanks to this trailblazer of a veterinarian who was very caring at the time there, he found sanctuary placement for some of the chimpanzees at this facility where there were hundreds of chimps having been used. So sometimes it's just one person who says, wait, we need to do the right thing here. It doesn't always take a whole lawsuit or regulatory scheme. Speaking of lawsuits, Save the Chimps STC up there is another sort of trailblazer in our community. They got their first chimps by suing the Air Force. So the Air Force was a major user of chimpanzees for the space program. And there was a large population of them on an Air Force base in New Mexico. And this amazing woman who has left us but is with us in spirit in everything I do, named Carol Noon, she, again, was a trailblazer. She said, this is not okay. She attempted to sort of get some of them and failed, and then sued the Air Force and won. And so the first 21 chimpanzees at Save the Chimps, which now has about 300 chimps in Florida, came as a result of a lawsuit. The rest of those, so from 21 to 300 at Save the Chimps, those chimpanzees came by taking over a privately owned facility that was in a lot of turmoil financially and in trouble with the USDA and other agencies for not following even those minimal standards. So Dr. Noon was able to take over this facility called Colston Foundation and retire all of those chimps. So that's another way that they come to us. Of course, the legislative framework you've heard all about, and that's where Chimp Haven comes into play. And I put that though ... to just remind myself to say only 13 have moved this year, which I've already said. But it's an idea and it's working, and there's lots of advocacy and energy around getting more chimps coming out of the federal labs and into sanctuary. Sometimes it's just as simple as asking for them. I helped to start Chimpanzee Sanctuary Northwest, which is in Washington State, and they had 7 chimps left. This company called Baeckler had leased a large population at a time of chimpanzees to all different labs. So they owned the chimps, but they would send them out to different labs and different studies. So these chimps had been used in hepatitis research, they'd been used in HIV and AIDS research and all kinds of other things. And they had 7 left. They had largely gotten out of the business as well in the early 2000s. And we were a group of people who sort of had a dream and didn't know what we were doing, and we thought we should start a sanctuary, and we said, do you want to get rid of those 7 chimps? And they said, okay. So we very quickly figured out how to provide sanctuary for them. And then my most recent project, it has really been a partnership, and it's sort of a new approach to providing sanctuary for chimpanzees. We have a partnership with the New Iberia Research Center, which is in Louisiana, the largest private owner of chimpanzees remaining. And through this partnership, we have created Project Chimps, which is what I will talk about in a little more detail in just a sec. So, I think as part of my bio was that I was part of NAPSA, which is the North American Primate Sanctuary Alliance. And just a couple years before that perfect storm was happening in the public view, several of us who directed sanctuaries, and at the time I was at Chimpanzee Sanctuary Northwest, we kind of realized, we saw this stuff on the horizon. We realized, there's all this work going on to get chimps out of research and labs and wherever else, but we're the people who are going to have to take care of them. So we had a few pushes, but we aligned around these issues, and we created this organization called the North American Primate Sanctuary Alliance, mouthful, or NAPSA, and we started kind of looking at what's our capacity, where are we going to need more capacity in this community, and we really started working together as a community rather than these individual sort of piecemeal efforts. As NAPSA grew, I was really attracted to the sort of collaboration and community that was building there, and I ended up leaving my position at Chimpanzee Sanctuary Northwest and moved to NAPSA and became its executive director for a couple years, and was able to work with the sanctuary community on various advocacy issues, which has always been sort of my passion. And part of my work with NAPSA was I sort of would reach out to anyone and see who would talk to me. And as we saw these things on the horizon, these changes starting to happen, I sent a note to the director of the New Iberia Research Center, and I said, this is NAPSA, and these are these professional sanctuaries, and let us know if you ever want to talk, because we kind of have the feeling that you're going to be out of this business soon, and we would love to work with you. And I, of course, thought that note would go into the trash, but perhaps thanks to all this wonderful work and this perfect storm and the universe kind of being primed for it, I got a call right back, and the director said, come talk to me. And so I went to Louisiana and toured the facility there and met 230 chimps and saw how they were cared for there, and worked with spent a day with the team there. And the point of the meeting was that they said, we would like to retire all of our chimps, will you help us do it? And having started a sanctuary once before, I knew that I did not want to do that again, or I thought that I did not want to do that again, because it's hard work. And so I took the opportunity back to our members, our NAPSA community, and said, who wants 230 chimps? And not surprisingly, no one jumped up and down and said, pick me, pick me. And at the time, the collective population of chimps amongst those sanctuaries that were working together was about 300. So it's a significant lift. And chimps are very expensive to take care of. The sort of rule of thumb is that it's about $20,000 per chimp per year to care for them. So no small feat, no cheap feat either. But having been there and toured the facility and met the chimps and seen all of these chimps who have given their lives to us for all of this research that we now know wasn't even necessary, I couldn't get out of my head. And I sort of tell the story now that I couldn't not try to put these pieces together and figure out what to do with this opportunity. So in putting all of these pieces together, I thought I do not want to start from the ground up. I know how to do that, and it wasn't fun. It takes a long time. It's really expensive. But I wanted to do something. So I sort of gathered some people who I trusted and respected, and started this organization called Project Chimps. At the time, I didn't know what it was going to be. I didn't know if it was going to be a new sanctuary or sort of some effort to solve this puzzle in some other way. I was hoping it was the latter. And so we started kind of working with New Iberia and tossing around the idea of what would it take and how much money. And I had in the back of my mind this property that I had seen a couple years before in North Georgia that was called Gorilla Haven at the time. And it was built by a couple that has since divorced. Wife had a significant passion for gorillas. Husband had a lot of money. And they brought their two gifts together and built this sanctuary for gorillas. However, and this was starting in the late 90s, I believe. Not a lot of need for sanctuary for gorillas. You don't see a lot of gorillas around. They're not used in research. They are endangered and very well protected. So they built this incredible. They bought this 230 acres. They built this incredible facility, and they only had a couple of gorillas ever kind of show up. They had some who lived at the Atlanta Zoo, who were sort of off exhibit, that came and stayed there for a while, and they had one that they owned themselves. But for the most part, it was sort of, they built it and they did not come. So I had seen it, and I had known, because our community is very small, that that marriage had the people had gone their separate ways. And so the facility was up for sale, sort of casually. There wasn't a for sale sign on the street, but it was known that it was available for sale. So I was sort of just wrestling with, how do we help these chimps, and what do we do, and how do we raise the money? And I don't want to start with a shovel, with the first from the ground. And I just realized all of a sudden that this facility was the perfect opportunity to explore with this partnership with New Iberia. So, long story short, we put all these pieces together, and we were able to pull off this agreement and buy this property, and in large part with thanks to HSUS for helping us launch in a significant way when it was still a dream and when it was very confidential still. I'm so excited to be able to talk about our work now, but for 2 years it was very quiet and hush-hush, and we weren't allowed to talk about it because it was so sensitive. And there was a lot of trust required with the lab, right? This was sort of a new thing. They were proactively doing the right thing. We wanted to be really respectful of that relationship, and so we weren't able to talk about it very much at all. So there's the facility. That's what's built now, and that's from a really cool drone that I love to play with. So those are the grade 8 buildings. So they built 5 buildings ultimately their hope was to house gorillas. Gorillas are a lot bigger than chimps, but they're great apes. They have sort of similar needs and requirements. So it was the perfect opportunity to kind of renovate and rejigger it a little bit, but have 5 buildings here and ready to put some former research chimps into. That's one of the buildings. That fortune that the now ex-husband no longer has went into this facility, and his fortune was thanks to the writing the calendar software for Palm Pilots. People here had those. You'll age yourself, but so we have Palm Pilot calendars to thank for this stuff. But they built these incredible facilities, and in addition to those habitat buildings that you see, and those share, let me just go back real quick, those share common open space habitat. So those buildings that you see on the outside are encircled by a cement wall, and on the inside is open top space that the chimps are not yet in, but will be once we clear a few more hurdles. So they'll have the opportunity to go out and plant trees and have sun on their face and all those things that we kind of emotionally want for them. And then it also has a clinic, it has an administration building, it has that habitat that I mentioned, it has all kinds of infrastructure that from a construction standpoint adds a lot of value to us. Some more pictures of our lovely facility. It's starting to turn. I was just saying to someone earlier, the fall colors, I need to update this so that we have the yellows and oranges in the hills. But it's a beautiful space on many acres in North Georgia. Just gorgeous area, really dreamy for the chimps. That's our habitat there, or the outside of our building from the habitat, so chimps will soon have access to that. And that's our kitchen that was actually redesigned by Rachel Ray, and will be on her show in a couple weeks. It really does take a village to do this, and I think I skipped over it in one of the slides before, but I sort of had the opportunity in putting all these pieces together to kind of really hand select the experts in our field to come together and work on this project. So it really does take a village. I'm here talking about it, but it takes all of those people and more to pull off this project. And the people who are making funny faces are supposed to be making a chimp play face, so that's why they look funny. Billy Joe Armstrong is here on the left. He's from the band Green Day, who's one of our very dedicated supporters. That's just a handful of our team there. And some more of our very dedicated and notable supporters, part of our village there. Kat Von D has done a lot of stuff for us, and she does a lot of amazing things for animals in general. She's there. She actually got into our pond. In addition to providing sanctuary for chimps, we also provide sanctuary for hundreds of koi who we inherited in that pond. And it was totally grown over by weeds. But she went in and pulled weeds and was an amazing trooper. Fast forward through roller coaster rides, several near collapses. I know more than I ever wanted to know about construction and a whole lot of begging for money. So the good stuff. So I am almost done. I know I'm almost out of time as well, but I just wanted to share this happy ending that we all get to work for. So we are moving 220 chimps. Unfortunately, 10 died between that time where I toured the facility and when we started moving chimps. So we have 220 left. That really motivates me to move as fast as we can and to beg for money as fast as we can and to do all of these things as fast as we can. The first 9 moved just in the beginning of September from Louisiana to our facility in North Georgia, and that's our custom-built trailer. Every chimp has their own window, so their cages are secured against the window so they can watch the world go by. Of course, they have no idea what's going on, and I'm sure they're very stressed, so again, that's more for us than them. But those are our first 9 residents, and I like to identify individuals in this stuff because, you know, we talk about all these numbers and all these overwhelming things, but these are the people who we work for and who all of those, you know, regulatory frameworks that we just heard about apply to. So that's Buttercup and Charisse, they're twin sisters, Emma, Genesis, Gertrude, Gracie, Jennifer, Latricia, and Samira. So those are our first 9. I mentioned Buttercup and Charisse are twins. Gertrude and Jennifer are sisters also. So it's a family already. We'll be moving them in groups of up to 10 over the next several years. It will take quite a while to fill up those buildings to make the social groups because they're divided by sex. So they're sort of also staggered by age. So we're taking them as they are housed in the lab, and we will start putting more natural groups together as we go, but these happen to be our first 9. That's Jennifer in her cage on her way to us. And Gwendy, who is our vet, who was, I think, providing water there in the transport cage. And that's Gertrude watching out the window, which I really like that image. Here they are coming up the road just a couple weeks ago. And we loaded them off one by one in their cages into the building. And this was after their long road trip at 16 hours from the lab to North Georgia. And of course, you know, we can tell them what's going on, but they don't know. And that was Emma relaxing finally. And I love that image of sort of that is what all of this stuff is for, right? And that's Buttercup and Charisse. They're actually not, they're the twins. They're not in mirror image as they usually are, but they're so attentive to each other. If you know twins in your life, they are just like that. It's pretty amazing to see. And we'll see if this video works. This is the last thing. This is just fun stuff. Very slow motion. That's Buttercup. Moving like molasses. Let me see if I start it again now that it's, nope. Well, you'll get the idea. So you know, they've been in this lab their whole lives. Most of them were born there. They haven't had a lot to do. They've given their bodies and their souls and their lives. So our job now is to give all of that back to them. And they love stuff like stuffed animals. And some of them will snuggle them and take them to their nest and cuddle, and some of them will destroy them. And if this was working at full speed, you would see her flailing around by it. But that's what we do, and that's what all of this stuff is about. So only 20 more trips to go. Feel free to get in touch or chat with me after if you would like to get more involved, and I will beg for money from you too.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Our next speaker will be Dr. Warren Casey.
Okay, thanks very much for having me here tonight. This is not the typical audience that I'm used to addressing, so it'll be really interesting. It's going to be interesting to get your feedback on some of the initiatives we've started. And what I'm going to talk about tonight is some very, very recent work that we've done to put forth an effort to modernize the entire way we do toxicology for drugs and other chemicals. So I'm going to unravel one of the acronyms. ICVAM is the Interagency Coordinating Committee on the Validation of Alternative Methods. It was formed by an act of Congress in 2000 to look into coordinating efforts across the federal government to reduce, replace, and refine the way animal testing is done. It was put under, the director of NIHS is given responsibility for maintaining that committee and providing support to it. And in theory, it's supposed to be composed of the heads of these 15 agencies. The primary focus of this committee over the past, until about 3 years ago, was strictly on reducing animal testing and refining animal testing. There was very little effort put into replacing animal testing. The working framework was that we're always going to have animal testing. Let's just figure out how to minimize the amount of animals we need, use statistics to figure out if we can reduce the number of animals tested, that type of thing. I took over about 3 years ago, and we changed the focus completely. A lot of things have happened in, say, the past decade. A lot of technologies have evolved that will actually allow us to start thinking about moving away from using animals to assess the safety of drugs and chemicals. So that's the change in focus now is really on replacing the use of animals as opposed to reduction and refinement. I will say that an agency head has never attended a meeting. Most agency heads have no idea what this committee is. We have no funding and no authority. It doesn't go a long way in life. But we actually have been able to accomplish quite a bit, and I'll talk about that today. So we're moving forward at a very fast pace. I want to start with something the NIH director said earlier this year. Francis Collins, in his last testimony before Congress, said that animal safety testing for environmental chemicals and drugs will be largely replaced by iPS cells and tissue chips within 10 years, and that these will be more accurate, lower cost, higher throughput. This is stunning for a couple of reasons. Ever since I've been there, I've been trying to get NIH to acknowledge, or at least put into context, the work that they're doing and to help people understand that it will eventually replace animal testing. Absolutely non-responsive, not interested in putting animal testing in the conversation at all. And then he comes out with this. The other thing is that environmental chemicals is up there. You'll be hard-pressed to find any other statement from him on environmental chemicals. He's very focused on medicines. So the fact that he came out and said this is amazing. We're trying to use this as kind of a rallying point. I will say that it would be nice to say it's naive, the statement. It's impossible, given the current framework, the legal and validation framework that we currently have. This is not possible. It's not possible in 10 years. It's not possible, period. In order to achieve this, we have to completely change the way we think. A complete paradigm shift, a real paradigm shift in toxicology. And that's hard to do because toxicology has just become embedded in policy, procedures, guidance, guidelines, legality over the past 100 years. And it's animal-based toxicology. So flip that around is challenging. So that's what we're going to be trying to do. Most people think of drug companies as using a lot of animals. They do, but they're probably not aware of how many animals you use for pesticide registration. So this is an example of all of those are animal tests that are required for the registration of pesticide active ingredient. The ones that are shaded are instances where the same test is performed on 2 different species. We can't count animal usage in the United States thanks to the Animal Welfare Act, but talking to the people that do the testing, we know that somewhere between 6,000 and 14,000 animals are used just in the registration of one pesticide active ingredient. If you look on the back of Roundup or some other pesticide, you may have 2 or 3 active ingredients. So not only do each one of those have to be tested, each formulation that they're used in has to be tested. And there are hundreds of formulations registered every year. So there's amazing, incredible number of animals being used for pesticide registration. So it's not just drugs. It turns out that, so the Big Fam Authorization Act was strictly about ethics, moving away from animal testing because it's the ethical thing to do. As the science evolves and there's actually the opportunity to replace animal testing, there are other drivers that become apparent. So the ethics is obvious. Efficiency is another one, that you can do more testing faster, cheaper if you don't use animals. So if you're the EPA and you're challenged with testing 10,000 or 20,000 chemicals, you can't do that with animal testing. And then the most important, I think, is the public health aspect, at least the most important in terms of getting support from Congress and NIH. If you can put the spin on it that this is actually, we have ways of improving our predictivity of toxicity and understanding disease if we can move away from animal models. That is a big selling point. And so all 3 of those are very important, and we're considering all 3 as we move forward. The reason it's important to identify which of these is really the driver has to do with how you design validations, what kind of argument you're making for moving away from the animal test itself, and I'll talk more specifically about that. But are you replacing an animal test just to replace an animal test? Or are you, and that's designing those experiments and that validation study is completely different than trying to design a study to show that a human-based test is actually better than an animal test. They're apples and oranges. They're very completely different approaches you have to take. So regardless of the motivation, what's happened over the past 20 or 30 years, especially the past decade, is that the institutional practices, both federal agencies and industry, the use of those animal-based tests can't keep pace with the rise in technology. Technology is now allowing us to be extremely precise about the human genome